Seeing the Judicial Service Commission holding interviews this week for positions as judges, but once again, not conducting interviews for positions on the Constitutional Court because not enough judges have applied for the post. This has happened several times in the past. Last year, you may remember how candidates for positions on the Constitutional Court and for the position of Chief Justice were asked about previous rulings, about their politics. Claims were made against candidates with no evidence being presented to back up those claims. Lawson Naidoo is the Executive Secretary of the Council for the Advancement of the South African Constitution. Lawson, good afternoon to you. In fact, you appear to blame the Judicial Service Commission or some of its commissioners for the fact candidates are not making themselves available. What do you believe is going wrong?
Good afternoon, Stephen. Thank you very much. Indeed, I think much of the blame for the failure of candidates to put their hands up for appointment to judicial office, certainly in our high courts, rests primarily with the Judicial Service Commission itself. It is the JSC's conduct over the last few years that has put people off from applying, because it's seen as a toxic environment where people are subjected to unwarranted attacks, as you say, about previous rulings that they may have made against individual members of the JSC or their political parties. And it's really seen for members of the JSC to seek some kind of retribution against candidates who appear before them. And this has really made it, created an environment where people are very reluctant to put themselves forward for these very public interviews, which rightly are held in the public eye, because we need to see the quality of candidates that put themselves up for judicial office and who are recommended by the JSC. But having said that, I think there's been a really welcome development earlier today, Stephen, when the JSC, following its closed meeting this morning, has announced that they've now adopted a set of criteria that they expect from candidates appearing before them, and that questioning by JSC commissioners will be limited to those criteria. And so it's likely to be a very much more focused set of interviews that will take place this week.
Are they adopting criteria that they'd already used in the past and just hadn't made public? Or is this now new criteria that's never been adopted before? There's a long history to this.
There is indeed a very long history to this, as you rightly say. There was some criteria that was initially put out by the JSC some 10 years ago or so, I believe. But it was never formally adopted, and it certainly didn't seem to guide the JSC in the execution of its mandate over the years. Towards the latter part of last year, after the October interviews, the JSC put out a draft set of these criteria or guidelines and sought public comment, which was received. And these guidelines, although I have not seen the final version as approved this morning, is certainly a step in the right direction, and we certainly hope that it will guide the JSC in future and will now encourage more people to come forward for consideration by the JSC, safe in the knowledge that they will be questioned on their suitability for office, the characteristics that we require to appoint the best of the best to the bench in the country.
The other issue, as I understand it, is that the JSC is also adopting a code of conduct for commissioners. So people will have to, I presume, maybe put questions, give advance warning of questions, have evidence to back up claims that they make. Do you think that will make a difference? And I say this, Lawson, because some of the commissioners are politicians. They represent us. And as a result, they should probably be given quite a lot of latitude, even though it has the consequence that you say.
Well, there are two issues here. Firstly, on the code of conduct, I'm not aware that a code of conduct has been formally adopted. There's been discussion for some time that the JSC requires a code of conduct for its commissioners to abide by certain norms and expected standards of behavior, especially when interviewing candidates. But I'm not aware that has been formally adopted. On the question of representatives from the National Assembly and the National Council of Provinces, who constitute 10 of the 23 members of the JSC, yes, they are there as our representatives, but they're there in order to assist the JSC in finding the appropriate candidates for judicial office. It's not an opportunity to score cheap political points or to tackle aspirant judges on their political beliefs and so on. So there needs to be a level of decorum in the JSC, which I think has been seriously wanting in the last few rounds of interviews. And that's something certainly I think we saw change in the October interviews last year, which were chaired by Deputy Chief Justice Mandisa Maya. And I think certainly from the brief look I had earlier this afternoon of the interview of Justice Molamela seeking confirmation as the President's nominee as President of the Supreme Court of Appeal, there seems to be a different demeanor around these interviews, and that's something I think is, again, to be welcomed. But I do think that a code of conduct at the end of the day is something that is going to be necessary to ensure that we institutionalize the kind of behavior that we're now beginning to see, with the JSC having implicitly, at the very least, acknowledged its failings of the last number of years, and will act in a way that will certainly encourage more judges from our high courts to seek judicial office either at the Supreme Court of Appeal, in the specialist courts, the Labour Appeal Court, the Competition Court, as well as, of course, at the Constitutional Court itself.
In the meantime, the Constitutional Court's been using acting judges. Now, these are acting judges often from the Supreme Court of Appeal or the High Courts. Does that weaken the court? And it can also depend on how many acting judges there are.
Well, indeed, and I think we saw in recent years, thankfully it's no longer the case, but 3 or 4 years ago we had quorums of the Constitutional Court where there were 3 or 4 acting judges in a quorum of 9. And that's something that is clearly not desirable. We need a full complement of 11 judges at the Constitutional Court to ensure stability and also to reflect the increased workload that the Constitutional Court has had to take on in recent years as a result of the expansion of its jurisdiction to cover all appeal matters and not just matters in constitutional issues. So there's a greater workload, and with only 11 judges there, the court is desperately in need of that full complement of judges. So I think there will certainly be occasions, such as when judges go on long leave, that there will be a necessity to appoint acting judges. It should not be the default position.
Lawson Naidoo, Executive Director at CASAC, do appreciate the time. Fairly certain not the last time you will be talking to us about the situation regarding the Judicial Service Commission.